Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable, it just seems like maybe like border police would be good and Capitol Police would be good, and sort of some sort of attention to the cultural rot that has basically overrun our way of life. Like all of these things seem just much more urgent to me than fighting against what? Like what is the imaginary sort of supervillain that is the like Wile E. Coyote or the Dr. Wily from Mega Man that is like spreading its tentacles across the world? I don't know. It just, to me, it seems insane.
Also, to channel Angelo again, he really disliked the fact that we never declared war in the last few conflicts we were in the Middle East. I guess our friend John Yu would say the authorization to use military force, the AUMF, is the equivalent of a declaration, but it wasn't really, and was used very broadly for a very long time across all different kinds of conflicts. So if, at the very least, if Continetti wants to make his case and try to persuade congressmen and then have them all debate and then have them declare war on what is your question, Spencer? And it's a good one. I think when you have to wonder what exactly you're declaring war on, you've got a real problem. Are we declaring war on Russia, Iran, and Hamas? One of those is a nuclear power. I'll remind Matt Continetti. So it's just irresponsible, it seems to me, rhetoric.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, features editor Spencer Klavan, and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. I am joined, as always, by our managing editor, Seth Barron, our publisher and president, Ryan Williams, and our editor, James Poulos. Full house once again, and we just can't avoid talking about Israel a second week in a row. I think this will probably be a staple for a while. The last time we recorded, Hamas had launched its attack, but we weren't exactly sure what was going to ensue. We're now recording on Wednesday afternoon, and I say that because it looks like events are rapidly accelerating and constantly unfolding here. But as of right now, we have not yet seen the full attack, the counterattack that Israel is inevitably planning. They do seem to be gathering their forces, but the weekend right after the attack was not quite as eventful as some of us thought it might be. Hamas had called for an international day of jihad. So happy Jihad Day to all who celebrate. But thankfully, nothing really seems to have come of that. I was traveling on a plane and was not hijacked or killed, so that's good. However, other sort of severe, forgive my gallows humor here, but this is just going to be sort of constantly severe. So what are we going to do? There were 500 people, at least, it seems, killed in an airstrike on a hospital, Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital, run by Gazans. For a while, it was claimed that this was an Israeli attack, but now U.S. and Israeli intelligence both say it was the Palestinian Islam group Islamic Jihad. So obviously tensions escalating. Biden traveling to the Middle East, potentially slowing down the war effort on Israel's part, but also attempting to broker some sort of deal. We're not totally sure of what nature. It seems possible that one thing he's doing is trying to stop the war from spreading to multiple fronts, trying to deal especially with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and worried maybe that Israel is going to strike against them as well, drawing in other actors, including potentially even Iran and the U.S. itself, into the conflict. But still sort of early days here. Obviously, this stuff's going to kind of unfold for a long time. What do you guys think about the actions that Israel has taken so far? What does this look like to you? Where do you think this is all headed? And what on earth is Biden up to?
I would say that, look, for a genocide, it seemed remarkably restrained. There's all this talk about proportionate response. And so I see a lot of tallies like, well, Hamas killed 1,400 people, but Israel has already killed 3,200 people or whatever it is. But clearly, if Israel wanted to, this is after dropping like thousands of bombs. So if they really wanted to, obviously they could have killed a lot more people. But I, I think the whole question of proportionality is a little odd. I mean, for one thing, from my understanding, the question of proportionality is not like you're only allowed to kill as many people as they killed. But the idea is in international law, is the number of people you've killed proportionate to the military goals you're trying to achieve? So the idea is, okay, well, we're trying to root out Hamas from these tunnels and what so forth. So we do have to level a lot of it. And, look, I mean, it's ugly. It's like super ugly. But you do hear this a lot. Like when AOC would say that it's not fair that Israel has the Iron Dome. Both sides, I mean,
Right.
the sense that, well, both sides should have the same amount of stuff, and only then is it fair for Israel to, fight back or whatever. I mean, if you think about like the history of war, I mean, the idea is like, oh, we lost 50 people, and then they lost 5 million people. I mean,
Right.
I'm
I
not
mean, that's
trying
a
to be
child's approach. I mean, like it's unfair. You can't have as many, like you have more toys than I have. Like that is obviously not how this works. And also I think there's a reporting sort of error here, or maybe a purposeful sort of obfuscation, which is like you say we killed this many people, that many people, whatever, but we're talking here about like innocent civilians gunned down and rounded up by Hamas, and then you know terrorists and militants being sort of hunted out by Israel, and this is confused by the fact that Hamas uses human shields all the time. But there is kind of, Israel does seem to be doing everything in its power to get civilians out. They've been publishing maps about where they can go to be safe. It's just that this is the tactic that Hamas uses, and for this reason, to try to make their opponents look like the bad guy. So it is also, I think, kind of a little misleading even to say, like, well, it's this number of people compared to that number of people. Like, these are totally disparate and distinct military endeavors, too.
I mean, it does seem as though Israel is killing a fair number of civilians. I guess that's why they keep talking about children, because
Right.
then there's no question as to whether it's a soldier or not. Yesterday there was this huge blow up over that hospital, which was so interesting because instantly everyone said Israel destroyed this hospital uh, and killed 500 people. But then it turned out, oh, well, the hospital was literally in the flight path of an Islamic Jihad, like rocket barrage. And it's pretty obvious now that one of the rockets malfunctioned and fell in the hospital. But now it's not even clear. And now that it turns out to have been like a Palestinian rocket, it's not even clear that there was that much damage. So there's a lot of fog of war stuff. I mean, look, it's the whole thing is a horrible disaster. I don't see anything good coming out of this, and probably a lot of bad.
Yeah, I will definitely co-sign that. Um, I swear I don't want to turn everything into a discussion of technology, but this is just, I mean, you see it at so many levels. The fog of war penetrating down to the level of like, very specific and discrete and detailed claims, which go from chatter on Twitter to literally front page New York Times news in this like garbled and unverifiable format. And then these instances become main memes in geopolitical alliance building. How many babies were dismembered today, and who did the dismembering, and is it real? And well, is it really bad, or is it just kind of the normal bad? Like the inability to even just establish what is happening from a moment to moment, which is the time scale that we're now stuck in because of the speed of our communications. When the Lusitania was sunk, it was like, there it goes. Now it's wartime. And that just seems, like horse and buggy level quaint. What it spells is, I think, a tremendous instability. I think it was Matt Parlmer. Glad that's not my name. It's hard to say. It's even harder to say than my own name. It was tweeting today. He said basically like entropy is winning. Like technology for all of the acceleration really isn't able to keep up with the amount of kind of chaos and the piling up of uncontrollable events. And I think that's true. And I would go a step further and say, entropy is spiraling out of control because the technology is accelerating beyond the pace of human beings to process it, much less to manage it and control it. So while all of this conflict is metastasizing, there's a fresh round of debate in tech circles, pitting the safetyists against the accelerationists. And you look under the hood, and I think it's basically you got one group of people saying we must use technology to create the ultimate weapon so we can be all powerful, and then you have another group of people saying no, we must use the most powerful weapons available to prevent technology from becoming the most powerful weapon available. And in my opinion, if we do not decelerate war, if we do not slow down the tempo of the conflict, then it is going to spiral out of control. And so, apologies to my neoconservative friends or whatever who think that no, we've got to rise to the occasion here and drop the bombs in the Ayatollah's backyard and all that. Would that it were so simple. It is not that simple, and I find myself in the strange position of, I don't know if it's begrudging respect or whatever, but it does seem that there are at least a few people in the administration cognizant of the fact that if the US moves too rashly or too hastily, it's going to end very badly, not just for many innocent people around the world, but I think for the US as well.
James brought up the neocons, so I will use that as the opportunity to transition here to what I want to talk about a little bit, just to note for folks. On Monday, Jonah Goldberg in the LA Times, Israel and Ukraine, Americans should remember it's the same war on two fronts. Matt Continetti on Tuesday in the Washington Free Beacon, from Jerusalem to Kyiv, it's all one war. So I just wanted to note, I think, the tendency on certain portions of the right these days to kind of rerun some of the facile moralizing in foreign policy that occasionally is part of the story they tell themselves about the Cold War. And then also, much more recently, a lot of the follies that we participated in Iraq, in Afghanistan, was the result of this kind of rhetoric. And it's we're saddling up to do it again. I think the public is much more skeptical, and on the right is much more skeptical of, they've grown more skeptical of Ukraine, even as they've generally expressed rightly, I think, lots of moral outrage about the conduct of Hamas, killing women and children and kidnapping and all the rest and raping. That all deserves moral outrage. But let me just read a few paragraphs from Continetti, and people can sort of recall what the similarities from some previous somewhat disastrous adventures in the Middle East. An arc of conflict, this is Continetti, an arc of conflict stretches from Jerusalem to Kiev. The active fronts cannot be understood in isolation from one another. Israel and Ukraine are different countries. They face unique situations, but this is one war. Towards the end, he closes out, much more is required. The administration is preparing to send to Congress a supplemental spending bill that will include funds for Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and elsewhere. Congress must pass it. then Biden must tell Congress that this money is a down payment. The next step is a much larger appropriation. America must commit to a conventional and strategic arms buildup that will instill fear in Moscow, Tehran, Pyongyang, and Beijing. Domestic critics will say that we can't afford it. They will have missed the point. Global security has deteriorated to such an extent that America has left the realm of can and should. We have entered the zone of need and must. Weapons must be produced in such quantity that Ukraine can reclaim territory, Israel can defeat Hamas, Taiwan can deter China, and America can lead the world to peace. This is the final paragraph here. To survive the perilous hour, Biden will have to abandon his desire to revive Franklin D. Roosevelt's domestic policy. He will have to embrace Franklin D. Roosevelt's foreign policy of global leadership and the arsenal of democracy instead, and he must do it for real. In this war, this one war for freedom, self-government, and the rule of law, there is no room for error. To quote our great and dearly departed friend Angelo Codavilla, whenever he would read stuff like must about Congress, he would say, "Who the hell are you to say must?" Angelo was always a fervent proponent of Congress debating this sort of thing, especially about matters of war and peace. And I think the must talk from from the armchair at AEI, scribbling on the page, is a bit rich. I think what the situation will demand is something a little bit different, which is that Congress is, and especially the sort of very narrow Republican majority in Congress, is going to have to debate these things seriously. And they have to recognize that amongst their constituents, as well as independents, there's just not a huge appetite to treat the Ukraine war in the way that Continetti wants it to be treated. And so that's something they're going to have to navigate. And I'll just say that when we talk this way about war, in his last paragraph, this one war for freedom, self-government, and the rule of law, we're not doing anything conservative. That is all progressive language that's been with both American parties, unfortunately, for the better part of a century, and it was brought to us by Woodrow Wilson, and you can draw a line from it to George W. Bush and to the current neocons. I would submit that that is not the best way to assess the world or treat foreign policy, both as a matter of strategy and tactics. So just count me as a dissenter from speaking this way about this new evolution of international instability we're dealing with now.
I mean, absolutely. I can't even. I mean, I hadn't read that item, but I can't even believe that it was written with a straight face. I mean, it's just so absurd to say that Ukraine, Russia, and Israel, Hamas are somehow not just parallel or congruent, but actually the same thing. It's so ridiculous and so absurd. Look, I mean, do I support Ukraine? Sure. Do I support Israel? Yeah. Do I think we need to bankrupt America and send our youth to die in either conflict? No. But they obviously have a different attitude. And I kind of feel like this is like this is sort of the breaking point. Like this, I think, is the dividing line. Whether you think American troops should be squandered, troops and treasure should be squandered on foreign adventuring. I don't know.
I mean, if it's all one war, I would really like to know against whom. I'm just not a fan of wars against abstractions or ideas. I mean, whether it's a war against the sort of global gathering darkness or against, terror or against drugs. I just feel like my whole life I've watched war after war against some sort of, vague, nebulous idea fall flat on its face. And not for nothing, but as we're talking right now, our capital is overrun by pro-Palestinian rioters, essentially, insurrectionists, if you like, to coin a phrase. And the idea that we are somehow, by expending more money and sending more boys to die, going to take up the moral leadership of the world just seems kind of impossibly blind right now. I too support both Israel and Ukraine. I just don't know how it's in any way sensible or realist or even operating on the level of reality, let alone foreign policy realism, to imagine that the answer here is like more debt and more nation building and more world police. It just seems like maybe like border police would be good and capitol police would be good, and sort of some sort of attention to the cultural rot that has basically overrun our way of life. Like all of these things seem just much more urgent to me than fighting against what? Like what is the imaginary sort of supervillain that is the like Wile E. Coyote or the Dr. Wily from Mega Man that is like spreading its tentacles across the world? I don't know. It just, to me, it seems insane.
Also, to channel Angelo again, he really disliked the fact that we never declared war in the last few conflicts we were in the Middle East. I guess our friend John Yu would say the authorization to use military force, the AUMF, is the equivalent of a declaration, but it wasn't really, and was used very broadly for a very long time across all different kinds of conflicts. So if, at the very least, if Continetti wants to make his case and try to persuade congressmen and then have them all debate and then have them declare war on what is your question, Spencer? And it's a good one. I think when you have to wonder what exactly you're declaring war on, you've got a real problem. Are we declaring war on Russia, Iran, and Hamas? One of those is a nuclear power. I'll remind Matt Continetti. So it's just irresponsible. It seems to me, rhetoric.
But I'll tell you what else is irresponsible.
Yeah.
Ryan.
Yes, please.
I will never forgive you for saying the word Kiev. I think we kind of have to.
I was channeling how Continetti would say.
Oh, okay. I mean, a narrow escape.
It's not chicken Kiev; it's chicken Kiev.
Yes, exactly. We're Americans. We eat freedom fries and we say Kiev. All right.
I'll echo Seth on one point, which is to say I don't want people to be confused. Russia is conducting a war of aggression that's pretty nasty in many similar ways that Hamas is, with torture and kidnapping and all the rest. So we should note that, and not. I don't want people to conclude that we're sort of morally indifferent to the fate of the Ukrainians or the Russians. I'm just talking more in terms of public deliberation about this and American interests.
Oh, here. I mean, yeah, there's no question that these are actually kind of morally unambiguous issues in their domain. Let us now, since Israel and that conflict will certainly be with us for a while, let's turn to a few other subjects that have been going on kind of in the background. Y'all remember Congress? Y'all remember the Speaker of the House? That is still happening. They did in fact oust Kevin McCarthy. Matt Gaetz did in fact lead the House Freedom Caucus to rebellion against party leadership. All of that was not a dream and doesn't get canceled by all this other stuff. Now the Freedom Caucus is attempting to elevate Ohio Representative Jim Jordan, but he has, as of this recording, twice lost a vote. First time by 20, now by 22 Republican no votes. This is the kind of guy that I think, the Gaetzes of the world would be very happy to see in the chair. So his victory would have represented a victory on the part of the people that initiated this whole affair in the first place. Now it seems like they got to look around some more. It's still an open question whether they will succeed in placing somebody in the chair that reflects their priorities better, or whether at the end of all this we end up with kind of another more establishment kind of guy back in the seat. I don't know what you guys think. What, if anything, is your opinion of Jim Jordan, and how likely is it that if it's not him, it'll be somebody that the Freedom Caucus likes?
I'm not sanguine. Jim Jordan, say what you will about the guy. He has not been effective dealing with big tech. I think that's a big problem. It's a game of inches in Congress much of the time. And so when you miss opportunities, even to just claw back a little ground or lay down a marker or plant a flag, choose your metaphor. A lot of what Republicans do in Congress is largely symbolic. Moving a line, maybe changing a punctuation mark in a 500-page piece of legislation. I don't want to be, too pessimistic about it, but From what I can gather, it looks like McHenry might be installed in a kind of permanent temporary position. It's a testament to just how bad things are on the Hill, and to how divided the party is. And it's not as crisp as just a pro-Trump, anti-Trump thing anymore. Factionalism is alive and well. I think it's not just Republicans who suffer from this, and I expect that the divides are going to run deeper as time goes by. So it wouldn't surprise me if we ended up with a kind of uniparty figurehead indefinitely in place as a transitional figure. This all kind of started with Ukraine funding, and I feel quite sure that the established interests on the Hill are going to do whatever they can to ensure that the spice flows. They can oftentimes seem incompetent, out to lunch, not up to the moment. And that may be true, but their defense in depth is very good. And it may have been perhaps surprisingly easy to dump McCarthy, but I think replacing him with someone good is going to be a much bigger challenge.
I can't speak to the the ins and outs of the House caucus politics. I do think it's weird that the Republicans would have two speakers of the House who were wrestling coaches within 15 years.
Wait,
Like,
which
what are the odds?
Can you say more, Seth? Expand. Which ones?
Well, Denny Hastert was a high school wrestling coach.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And Jim Jordan was a wrestling coach.
Right.
I mean, I guess Jim Jordan was like a wrestling champion. I mean, I have nothing against wrestling. It's just so odd. I mean, maybe the Midwest, they elect a lot of like wrestling coaches. I mean, I know it's a very big sport in Ohio and Iowa and like Illinois and so forth, but
maybe the
I
answer
don't know.
here is just a wrestling match. Has anybody considered that? Like an
Oh,
Underdome situation?
like between Hakeem Jeffries and
Sure.
Jim Jordan? Sure.
Or an anointed champion, like they just pick people.
Oh, yeah, okay.
As representatives.
I think it's interesting. Again, the Republicans are, supposedly looking foolish because they have debates and they have ideas and, I guess, and can't agree on everything. And like as opposed to the Democrats who are just, all lined up behind Hakeem Jeffries, nephew of like, New York's most famous anti-Semite and black supremacist. But again,
Wait, who's Hakeem's uncle?
Leonard Jeffries.
Oh yeah, okay. Thanks.
We're learning a lot. I've Seth in like
Well,
began
Seth
this
is
meeting
chock
with
full
no-
of New York
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah, I guess so.
You know.
But I don't think there's any look. I think it would be fine if we had a speaker for like, I don't know, a year. At least that way we wouldn't send any more money to Ukraine, right?
Well,
I
it is
mean-
interesting to sort of recall that before the Israel conflict broke out, this was all sort of about the shutdown and funding and spending, which now seems sort of a more distant possibility of really, judging by that Constantine piece that you read, Ryan, if that's any indication of sort of the mood among, as it were, establishment types or at least neocon types, it seems unlikely now that there's going to be like real movement on what was already an incredibly difficult and gridlocked issue. Basically, I just feel like the news cycle has not been kind to this whole endeavor. But
No, the timing is terrible,
Yeah.
and that's not really Matt Gaetz's fault. He just got unlucky. Also, the other unfortunate thing is, somebody on Twitter, I don't know who put it together originally, but they had, kind of the office shots and the names and districts of Rashida Tlaib, AOC, Ilhan Omar, who else? Ayanna Pressley, and a few others, and dubbed them the Hamas Caucus. which is fitting and good, and they should be slapped around for that. I mean, Rashida was still this morning, I think, on the Hill talking about Israel bombing the hospital, which has been totally debunked. So that it's distracting what most of America should be observing about these Congress critters, which is that, at least sort of as a matter of spiritual and civic health, even if he got his nationalities a little crossed up, these people all should be sent home. They're sort of un-American in a way, in a deep and substantive way. And unfortunately, this fiasco with Jordan, with the failure of the continuing failure of the Republican caucus to elect a speaker, is distracting from what otherwise should be easy PR wins. And not just PR stunts, but actually a substantive critique of some problematic Congress people.
Right. I mean, I was talking to a pal who listens to the podcast, I think. So I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want to out him and he didn't give me permission. So if you're listening, I'm sorry for stealing your idea without crediting you, but I don't want you to get doxxed either. Anyway, this guy who is a sort of ex-leftist, like left to left kind of fellow, pointed out to me that when he was on the left and meeting with like the DSA and all of that, they were all constantly saying, oh, the Republicans, they're so much more disciplined than we are. The left is chaos and we're always in panic and having all these sort of ideological disputes, but the right just knows how to circle the wagons. And of course, now that he's hanging out with right wingers and conservatives, we're all constantly saying, oh, the Democrats, they're such a ruthless and efficient machine. They're constantly circling the wagons. And he was like, yeah, that's all fake. It's fake everywhere. Everybody is constantly fighting and infighting and nobody can get their act together. I will note, though, having said all of that, I noticed that, the Democrats sort of all rallied behind kicking McCarthy out and are not now sort of eagerly leaping to make compromises about who's going to be the speaker. Like, it just seems like they're going to vote for Hakeem Jeffries until they're forced to take some other speaker from the Republicans. So it does at least speak to the foolishness of expecting any sort of compromise out of this Democrat Party or any kind of, even marriage, even of convenience. Like, it does not seem as if their interest here is anything other than just to like distract, Ryan, from all of the other incredibly shameful things that many of their members are doing, which I'm sure they're only too happy to do because, as you say, it becomes so egregious in the wake of like Hamas terrorism to have these people just full on with their faces hanging out, these squad girls saying things like that we need to defund Israel and everybody needs to just roll over and let Hamas take over. But yeah, it does sort of seem like a missed opportunity, and it's hard to see now how they just wrap this up quickly and move on and take the L.
Yeah, I found it interesting that in the last few days there have been a few high-profile, like a big donor to UPenn, I forget his name, but one of the Harvard trustees, who's an Israeli billionaire, resigned. These sort of funder types of their alma maters have in recent days been shocked and appalled at the sort of pro-Palestinian apologists and ralliers on campus. So that's a small silver lining. I hope that movement grows. But my other question to them would be, where have you been for 30 years? I mean, this is not.
If only somebody had told you. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's been so much damage done. I hope Ken Griffin regrets giving $300 million to Harvard, not too long ago to get his name on the business school. But I worry that, this is all just sort of a little flash in the pan and it will all go back to normal afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, Sohrab Ahmari wrote a piece, I think it was in Compact, I can't remember, about the opportunity for the new middle, which I think at least vocalized what a lot of people were thinking, precisely to your point, Ryan. Certainly, the one thing that is now happening is the normie libs, many of them Jewish, but not all of them by any means, who had either genuinely gotten kind of bamboozled by the year of our Floyd 2020 and all of the kind of rhetoric around it, or felt intimidated, like they couldn't speak up against the sort of BLM industrial complex because they thought they would lose their jobs or whatever, with good reason, since people were in fact getting fired at the time. Anyway, all of those people, of whom there are many, suddenly sort of looked around and were like, oh man, I do seem to be amongst a bunch of like genuinely bad actors. And are we the baddies? And is this in fact what decolonization means? And so, our friend Chris Rufo has been doing just the Lord's work by trying to hammer that home and say, yeah, this is actually what you signed up for, but there is still time to flee. You can still abandon ship.
Yeah.
And you've seen some people doing that. I don't know. I'm sort of the perennial, or I'm accused of being like the perennial optimist. So I feel like maybe this is just a cockamamie hope, but it does seem like there is some sort of opportunity here to actually pick off people from that intimidated middle. On the other hand, the cognitive dissonance is just so extreme. You had, I think it was Harvard's president saying, yes, all of these student groups are co-signing their support for Hamas and their basically desire to see, Jews exterminated. But we support free speech. Like, that's what we're really about here at Harvard, which after months and months and years of just relentless persecution of anybody that even dared to suggest that anything might be slightly amiss about this whole BLM thing would be rich if it weren't obviously a situation of hierarchy. To say that it's not hypocrisy, it's hierarchy, and that does seem to be just like full steam ahead, right? We're just going to keep doing that, and I do think that we sometimes underestimate the extent to which at least the leaders of this woke movement will just keep a straight face and kind of barrel forward with exactly that. I mean, do you guys think that there's like room to save the normies in the midst of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, sure. All fronts should be pursued, and I think I think a lot of normal Americans are just waking up to how insane their domestic politics have gotten, and that will accelerate through this coming election. Although the waters will be quite muddied by multiple indictments of one of the candidates, for example. But yeah, I think we should do everything in our power to persuade normal American citizens of the crisis that we're in and how to get out of it. So
yeah. I mean, I think the problem is when you have like a semi-authoritarian state, like it doesn't really matter what the people think, does it? Like in the Soviet Union, everybody knew Pravda was just lies, and that whatever the Soviet, said was just, whatever the state put out was nonsense, but they were still in control. I mean, I don't know if you saw this, but I guess since, the summer of Floyd, 94% of new job growth among the S&P 500 has been non-white. Like all of the new hiring essentially has just been like, diversity hiring, hiring minorities. And one has to assume that a lot of that has been in the expansion of the human resource and DEI apparatus. Sure. And, this commissar class is like running the country, basically. So, look, it would be great to uproot them. But I don't even see how, our colleague Scott Yenor found this awesome video of, these diversicrat types down in Texas working at different universities, talking openly about, well, Texas has passed these new laws, so we can't really do, foreground diversity and equity and inclusion the same way we did, but here's ways we can work around it and achieve the same goals. I mean, these people aren't stupid. They're not going to like fold up, like close up the diversity shop. So, I mean, that's the thing about the deep state. It's really deep. So I don't know. I'm a little. I'm not sanguine about this question.
Well, to your point, one of our other topics that we wanted to hit before we go is this guy Douglas Mackey, whom we talked about briefly on the show before, but This is known on Twitter as Ricky Vaughan, and he posted a bunch, I guess, of memes in the lead up to the 2016 election, telling people to go vote for Hillary by phone, stay home and just text. And, this was obviously a joke, but it also, on the thesis that it would have caused some people to stay home, he's now been accused of basically defrauding people out of their vote. And he's gotten 7 months in prison. He was sentenced by a United States district judge. And the piece that I read about the whole affair reported that with 58,000 followers, Ricky Vaughan was, according to a February 2016 analysis by the MIT Media Lab, one of the most significant influencers of the then upcoming presidential election. So, yeah, good job, guys. Like, real stellar journalisming to call this like 58,000 follower meme account a world transforming influence upon the world. But I don't know. I mean, that to me is kind of if everything else weren't going on at the same time, this alone would be just an incredibly alarming sign of the deterioration of justice and the rule of law.
Well, this is a total disgrace. I mean, the Media Lab is a joke. It used to be run by Joy Ito, who had to step down because of his Epstein connections. They're wrong on purpose. 58K, as we know, is almost nothing on Twitter. I mean, I'm sitting pretty at about 26K. My engagement is so bad, I may as well have 5 followers sometimes. So that's sort of cut number one. Cut number two is it's really like by this standard, it's the low information voter on the internet who should be doing jail time for being dumb enough to believe a meme joke. Like, is it really your fault if you create a meme saying like, oh, if you want your preferred candidate to win election, what you need to do is you need to take the SIM card out of your phone and you need to place it under your tongue, and then you need to intone the name of your candidate as loud as you can so that your whole neighborhood can hear, and that's going to get beamed up by 5G, and then it's going to change the way the electrical ways, right? And then people actually believe this, and then you're accused of election interference. This does not comport with basic standards of justice. This is an abomination, and my only consolation here is that 7 months in jail can be just enough to turn someone from a somewhat well-known figure to a figure of great power. So we'll see how things look 7 months from now, and it wouldn't be the first time that a great miscarriage of justice led to a certain kind of poetic justice on the back end.
Some of us know Doug, and he remains optimistic that they will win on appeal to this circuit and then the Supreme Court if they have to go that far. And I think he, sort of normal practice for this sort of thing, well, I haven't looked it up nor gotten any updates, but is that he won't be serving time while they appeal. So I guess the hope is that he'll never actually get to federal lockup. But yeah, the whole thing, James is correct, is really just a disgrace on our rule of law and the First Amendment.
Yeah, no, that's all very well put. Just to lighten things up before we transition out of this episode, I do not want to close before we touch upon my favorite news story of the week. Again, a discovery of the great Chris Rufo. You may remember Patrice Cullors, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, went sort of into, vanished into obscurity until it was revealed that she had used just astonishingly lavish funding that was aimed at BLM for all sorts of personal enrichment, has now resurfaced as what I suppose we're just agreeing we're going to call a modern artist. I mean, the pictures have to be seen to be believed, and we saw them, so now you have to as well. We'll put the link to them in the show notes. I can barely describe. I feel like I'm going to get canceled for just describing these acts of performance art. I mean, this woman naked, covered in gold paint, with truly fabulous updo, it must be said. Um, I'm sure we're all rushing to the next Patrice Cullors show, and I don't want to, rain on anybody's parade, but I do just want to point out that we are at fault here. So we apologize for anybody that has had these images inflicted upon them. As people know, Claremont and the DC Center has been very much at the forefront of revealing where BLM funding goes, what it's being used for, and where your donations end up. You can, by the way, visit dc.claremont.org to find the tracker. But it turns out that the discovery of her grift is one big reason why Cullors felt that she had to go into art. Here's an interview with her on africannews.com. Artist and activist Patrice Cullors is leaning into her art these days. At one point, the impact of accusations of financial mismanagement at Black Lives Matter, from which she resigned in 2021, wounded her so deeply. Her mental health was imperiled, and she felt her very life was in danger. What has ultimately saved her more than once, she feels, is her art. Well, that's all very nice. And the only question that remains here is, what do you guys think is going to be Ibram X. Kendi's next gig now that he too has been revealed as a sham?
Well, he's still hanging on over there at Boston University. So it'll be, who knows what's going to happen to Kendi. I really, really hope he doesn't appear nude in body paint somewhere.
The emperor literally has no clothes.
I trust that he won't.
Doesn't it seem kind of like derivative to just like paint yourself, to get naked and paint yourself in gold paint?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at the pictures.
Derivative of what?
Well, like the movie Goldfinger. Oh. I guess there's other pictures where she's not covered in gold paint.
Yeah.
But I mean, just walking around naked, it doesn't seem like that. Like, what's so great about it?
Yeah, it makes
drugs, Seth. Drugs were involved.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess that explains something. It just being naked doesn't seem like it's that I mean, it's not that scandalous. I'm sorry. Like, people are naked all the time now. I mean, I just don't. I don't understand what she's doing.
Who isn't naked? It would be quicker just to list who's not naked.
Kind of. Whatever. I don't have a lot to say, but yes, I definitely encourage everyone to look up Patrice Cullors nude, which is basically the only way you can find these pictures. And they're really, I mean, whatever. You know, it's what it is. You want to see it, it's out there.
That's the if you want the you didn't find an unsanitized version, did you, Seth? I don't want to direct people to more visual trauma than is necessary. But,
no, I found the complete, the non-blocked out ones.
Don't go to where Seth told you to go, people.
Just go to Cullors.
Just go to Chris Rufo's Twitter feed if you want the censored ones. It's this is a family podcast after all, Seth.
This is the second.
Well, I'm not posing the pictures.
I'm just having fun.
I just sent you guys the picture.
Oh no. This is okay. This is going to be a live react here. Oh my.
Oh, good.
This is really quite something. There are some strategically placed flowers. It looks like
flowers and also like dots, like on her chakras.
Ah, yes. I hadn't noticed
like
that detail.
Throat chakra and the. I guess I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. Well, I guess it's out there now.
I mean, you're elite, right? You're artists, America. This is sort of, I mean, to me, the second worst thing about this, besides having to look at Patrice Cullors naked, is the absolute state of the arts. Like, it's sort of difficult to recall that art used to be a thing that, people did in centers of high culture and sophistication, but to think about it as the clearinghouse for disgraced grifters is certainly revealing, if nothing else. Definitely a masks off and everything else off moment, but depressing as well to consider that, like, while actually excellent artists languish in obscurity on Instagram and Twitter, this is art. This is art. This is what happens. Very much a metaphor for everything that BLM has always stood for. And to me, it is delightful. With that, I have to close us out here and invite all of our listeners to read the damn site. Every week, we like to pick a few pieces from AmericanMind.org, which, if you didn't know, is a little website that we run. We don't just do podcasts and talk about naked ladies. We also publish articles that are somewhat more serious in content, most of them. And we wanted to highlight a few things, bring a few things to your attention. The piece that I have picked this week is right up on the front, at least right now. We may have published some other things by the time you hear this, but it's called "Facing Up to Immigration," and it's by Tomas Orban, no relation to Victor Orban. It's a report from Lampedusa, which you may recall is the tiny island, sort of almost exactly halfway in between Italy and Africa, where a lot of migrants sort of make their way before getting onto the continent and then disappearing into the Schengen zone, which is a sort of open, effectively borderless amalgam of EU nations. Not long ago, over 7,000 migrants with more than 120 boats arrived in a single day. Tomas was on the scene and has a lot to say about the way that this whole crisis is managed. To me, the most sort of chilling and telling part of the whole piece is the way he describes how an entire sort of apparatus and government system is in place just to look away, just to sort of get this out of people's view and encourage people's natural impulse not to deal with difficult and uncomfortable realities. And he sort of uses this as a metaphor for what's going on throughout the rest of Europe and indeed across the world in the face of what is now basically a flood tide of economic migration. I mean, they talk about this as if people were fleeing from crises, and certainly many of them are fleeing from conditions that none of us would want to be in, but it's really neither here nor there, since at this point what we're dealing with really is just like people wanting to live in places that are simply nicer, whether or not there's any disaster going on around them. Everybody wants to live in nice places, but the point is approaching, if it hasn't already been reached, at which, they're really, you got to do something about this, or else there won't be a Europe to do much of anything about. So, Facing Up to Immigration by Tomas Orban. We are going to publish more migration pieces that sort of spin off of this and also deal with the American situation in the days to come. Seth, what do you got?
I like this piece by T.J. Harker. He's a former federal prosecutor, so he knows the ins and outs of and the nuts and bolts of how all of that works. It's called A Tale of Two Crimes. It's the first part of a two-part essay he's writing. And he talks about Collinford Mattis and Uruj Rahman, who were, I don't know if they're a couple or not, but they were two lawyers who, during the Floyd riots in New York, firebombed a police car and were driving around ready. And I think they maybe threw another one at a police car. Basically, they were driving around with Molotov cocktails, and they wanted to burn police cars and so forth. It was pretty remarkable because he at least worked at a well-regarded law firm, and Harker goes through the process by which their charges were downgraded, and then eventually they had pled guilty, and then so they were set for like a 10-year prison sentence. But then the new U.S. attorney stepped in and really wrote this insane thing, talking about racial justice and social justice and mostly peaceful protests. So I think they wound up getting basically as much time as Douglas Mackey's going to be getting, even though they actually were firebombing vehicles during a riot. It's a really good piece. It goes through, all the details and breaks it down very nicely. So I recommend A Tale of Two Crimes, Part 1 by T.J. Harker.
Yeah. And I assume Part 2 is on its way fairly
Part
soon.
2 is on its way and will be about, what's his name, Enrique Torres, I guess, the head of the Proud Boys, who just got 30 years in prison, even though he wasn't in DC during the insurrection, the
Right.
quote unquote insurrection.
Yes.
So yes, he'll be contrasting the firebombing versus the, the supposed planning of the tour of the Capitol, the unauthorized tour.
Thanks, Seth. Ryan, what do you got?
I wanted to flag a piece. It needs a little background by our friend Carson Holloway called Writing the Right. So we have this edited volume that we put out. Arthur Millick edited it out of our Center for the American Way of Life in DC, and it's called Up from Conservatism, Revitalizing the Right After a Decade of Decay, or maybe Decades of Decay. And it's, critical of some of the trajectory of some of the modern establishment right. And there's a piece in there by Carson Holloway about not saying that America isn't an idea, among other things, but pushing back against the only creedal sort of nature of some of the right and the neocon right over the last 20 or 30 years, and the playing up of America as an idea and as just an idea at the expense of the normal particulars of politics and culture and peoples that the founders would have taken very seriously, as well as they did their principles in the Declaration and ideas, etc. And Matt Continetti reviewed the book for, I forget what publication, but doesn't matter. And he took issue with some of the book in general, and then basically more or less slandered Carson or mischaracterized him, to say the least. And so this is Carson responding. And so it's useful both to enrich our understanding of the place of principles and the fact that they're not the be all and end all in America's story and founding, but also just correcting the record for basically what I would say is somewhat tendentious, if not a bit disingenuous, critique by an endowed program director at AEI, Matt Continetti. So we just wanted to correct that record. It appeared in commentary, I recall now. That's and Carson wrote, it's probably 1,200 words in response. Commentary wasn't interested, so we published it at the American Mind. Writing the Right, Carson Holloway.
Yes, indeed. The sort of thing that you will only find, I think, on the American Mind, these sorts of discussions. James, what do you got?
Well, this one is for the ladies, as you will see, but not just for the ladies. It's called The Mother's Gauntlet by Lane Scott. And not what you might expect out of a piece about the fine art of homemaking. It's described as a daily battle for self-governance in an increasingly hostile world. And I just found some of these passages very arresting, very thoughtful, very provocative. What a dream job. Who wouldn't jump at the chance to enjoy that kind of freedom? Something similar to the self-employed entrepreneur, except even the financing is provided. But in fact, it turns out that total freedom is in some ways the source of the dissatisfaction. I'll just read a little paragraph here and send you on your merry way. Most of the time, no one is watching, no one is cheering, no one is there to keep you honest. And worst of all, no one is there to tell you what ought to be done now versus later that day versus next week versus never. What this means is that there is no system to prevent you from slipping into your worst habits day in, day out, and your habits are the crux of the issue. Life at home with small children requires self-governance. Heavy stuff, but very brilliantly put, I thought. The Mother's Gauntlet by Lane Scott.
Yeah, I love that piece as well. And there are so many dimensions to it. I won't add to what James has said, but you should definitely go read that, as well as all the pieces we mentioned at AmericanMind.org. Thank you all once again for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to learn more about our projects here at Claremont, we've already mentioned a few places you can go to do that. Talked about our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. Talked about AmericanMind.org, but we have not yet mentioned our sister publication, the Claremont Review of Books, which you can find at ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com. A lot of stellar essays and book reviews in front of the paywall up there. And if you want to get behind the paywall, all you have to do is subscribe, which will also get you the print edition in your mailbox. A rapidly vanishing pleasure opening up a printed publication. We still offer it at ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com. And you can also donate to support everything we do at Claremont.org/donate. We appreciate that immensely. Donations large and small help us do what we do, and we love doing what we do. So thank you as well to our production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri. Don't forget to rate the podcast 5 stars wherever you're listening, or at least if you have criticisms, you can keep them to yourself, or you can email us without posting about them. Share the show on whatever social media app is your preferred one, and just let people know in the group chat and around the kitchen table. With that, thanks to all of you for listening. We will talk to you next week.